Self-concept is determined by a number of different things, each with their own impact on who we are and how we have come to determine ourselves to be identifiable in certain ways. Let's start with how you would describe yourself. If you were meeting someone or speaking to them on the phone or in an interview, what kind of terminology would you use to describe yourself? Would you use your intellectual capacity, your belief systems, your social roles, what talents you feel you have, your appearance? What would be the identifiers that you use? And then based on those, how much of those identifiers are grouped into certain categories? For example, do you have quite a few about your career, educational status, or social role? Do most of your identifiers relate to your gender or your age? Those are all parts of how we identify ourselves, and we label ourselves accordingly. Now, one way that we do this is through this idea of self-awareness. And self-awareness is just basically, simply put, the awareness you have of yourself. How likely are you to accurately describe yourself and understand your own behaviors and your own likes and dislikes? Why you like things and why you dislike things. That is what self-awareness is. Why do you have the personality that you have? And what is your personality? Now, there's biological and social roots in the idea of personality or characteristic ways that you think and behave across a variety of situations. Now, one way to sort of determine what your personality might be is through what's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Now, the MBTI is one of those long past due surveys that has really had some valuable resources for those that are trying to determine personality traits and how they impact their interpersonal communication. So let's look at some of the categories for the MBTI. In terms of how you can use this scale to look at your personality, the first thing that it looks at is how you determine your favorite world. So for example, do you prefer to focus on the outer world or on your own inner world? That is the difference between extroversion and introversion. Now, oftentimes people have a misconstrued conception of introversion and extroversion. Simply put, an introvert gains energy from being alone and depletes energy more quickly in a crowd. And the reverse is true for those with extroversion. With extroverts, they gain energy by being in a crowd and deplete energy faster by being alone. The next category that you look at is information. Do you prefer to focus on the basic information you take in, or do you prefer to interpret and add meaning? And this is called sensing or intuition. So those would be another set of categories that you would use to determine your personality. And this scale will give you either an S or an N, either an E or an I. The next one is decisions. When making decisions, do you prefer to first look at logic and consistency, or do you first look at the people and the special circumstances? And this is the difference between thinking and feeling, so a T or an F. When you take this survey, you'll be able to see sort of how these align with each other. And then the next one, structure. In dealing with the outside world, do you prefer to get things decided, or do you prefer to stay open to new information and options? And that's the difference between judging and perceiving. So these categories allow you to sort of label yourself in terms of personality traits. And it can create a big picture for you in order to help you to understand yourself and become more self-aware. In addition to that, we have to look at our social structure and how that impacts our self-concept. How aware are we of how our social situation impacts who we are? The first concept to consider is that of reflected appraisal. We develop a self-concept that in times reflects the way we believe others see us. So we assume we have this image, and therefore we reflect that image back onto ourselves and believe these things to be true. In some cases, a significant other. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily a husband and wife or boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean anybody that has an opinion in which we've placed a lot of value on. So these folks can significantly impact how we see ourselves as well. If you have a significant other or a friend or a parent or whomever, a boss, some kind of person that you look up to, if they have an opinion about you, that creates quite a big impact on how you see yourself. Now, another one would be through the idea of social comparison. And social comparison is a way we use to evaluate ourselves in terms of how we compare to others. If you really think about it, how would you ever know whether or not you are short or tall or pretty or smart? How would you know any of that without socially comparing yourself to those around you? So we use social comparison as another form of identification. Now, another thing to keep in mind is those traits that we listed earlier. Think back. If we talk about our moods or our religious beliefs or our political beliefs, our values, our physical traits, our jobs, all of those, do any of those come through reflected appraisal or social comparison? And answer these questions for yourself. Who or what influenced these behaviors, influenced these choices that I've made? And am I happy with this? And if I am, why? If I'm not, why not? Ask yourself those questions when looking at those labels that you've placed on yourself. And then consider the idea of what is called perceived self and presenting self. Perceived self is how we perceive ourselves to be, again, the labels that we put on ourselves. However, presenting self is a little different. It is how we present ourselves to those outside of us. We will have this image that we want to create of who we are. Now, if you've ever looked at a social media account, you'll notice that there's a different persona often represented in social media than what you would see face to face. And that is because of some of these issues like reflected appraisal and social comparison and such, that we want to present only a certain amount of information or a certain style of information. All of these things are part of self-awareness and can truly impact your identity and again be a major part of self-concept.